Welcome to Stats and Scheme. I am Shawn Syed, joined as always by my good friend Seth, whose Twitter feed was littered this weekend with the ups and downs of fandom on the way to that Lions loss. You know, if we had a producer for this podcast, we would cue up some sad music, but of course we don't. Tej, just checking in on you. You know, how was the weekend? How many texts did you get? How are you feeling right now?
If someone read my text messages, they would think that there was like a tragedy that happened to me. My Lions did lose in the conference championship game. They were 30 minutes away from the Super Bowl, but like everything that happens that, doesn't go my way in my life, I just chalk it up to variance. So that's exactly what I'm doing with this Lions loss. But I am really excited today to talk about both Ravens, Chiefs, and 49ers, Lions, even if the results of one of those games didn't go my way.
Tej, I love that. Just chalk up all the bad things to variance. We're obviously both process over results people a lot of the times. I like that. But I guess, I always introduce, my good friend, potentially being a bad friend here. We're going to review that Lions 49ers game in all its glory. But I think first we'll go Ravens, Chiefs. We'll start Ravens offense versus Chiefs defense. And, I thought that it was surprising that Kansas City was just able to win up front on both sides of the ball. Well, obviously, and we'll talk about this side first. You see some of those rotations to cover two pretty early in the game where Kansas City is able to stop some of those kind of like RPO looks that I thought Baltimore was trying to get to. Kansas City was able to be pretty confident playing man coverage. There's so much that unlocks for your defense when you can play man coverage like that, when you feel like you have the advantage in the matchup between your cornerbacks and their receivers. And I thought Baltimore, they wanted to, get the ball further down the field a lot of the time. And that ended up being a bunch of different issues. I like that the Chiefs were changing up their fronts, really close to the snap or almost even post snap to mess with Baltimore's offensive line a little bit. That's just the kind of some stuff off the top. I think we do have a lot to talk about on this side of the ball. Tej, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Baltimore's offense versus Kansas City's defense?
Like you mentioned, it was truly a masterclass by the Chiefs defense when you look at what they were able to do to a Ravens offense that was playing at a very high level, especially towards the end of the season. The Ravens had 12 plays where they had a -1 EPA or worse. So they had 12 different plays where they were losing at least a point of scoring. You think about when Lamar had a sack fumble that lost them about 5.5 EPA. You think about the play by L'Jarius Sneed, that was one of the best plays of the game and maybe even the entire season for the Chiefs defense, where he was able to punch the ball out of Zay Flowers' hand as he was headed into the end zone. And then the possession after that where Lamar was intercepted when targeting Isaiah Likely on a drive where the Ravens were driving. So Ravens offense in the second half, I thought, was playing at an okay level. It was just the Chiefs defense kept making plays over and over. And you really look at what the Chiefs defensive backs were able to do to the Ravens wide receivers. Zay Flowers did have a good game for the most part, other than a mental error and that fumble. When targeted, he had a 50% success rate and was their leading target share on the team. But the Chiefs defense forced Justice Hill to have a 20% target share in this game. They limited Odell Beckham for the majority of the game. The tight ends, Nelson Agholor also were pretty limited, as well as Likely, Andrews, and Agholor all had an 8.57% target share each. So I thought that was a really great job by Spags and the defensive backs like Sneed and McDuffie to really hold a Ravens offense and a Ravens receiving group that was playing better to very limited opportunities.
Going into this one, I thought both of us were pretty curious, what is Baltimore going to do on the ground there? Maybe that's something where you feel like, our receivers aren't going to be able to just win one-on-one constantly. Let's get things, through the ground in, maybe the hard way, but still be able to create that way. Did you pull the pass rate over expected number for the Ravens in this one?
So the Ravens had a plus 13.6% pass rate over expected, which was 96th percentile among all NFL games and their highest of the entire season.
Okay, so like an extremely high number. And I think that certainly matches up with what was going on film. And, this one, I was kind of knocking back and forth in my head. I want to hear what you think about it. It was very much like a live by this word, die by this word in this situation where, like you go as far as Lamar takes you in a lot of ways. Obviously, you'd like to see things manufactured a little bit more for him, particularly on the ground. And as you mentioned, the second half, when I was looking back at it, through the film, you get to one of those drives where you get there and you have an awesome play called. You get Flowers on that underneath route, ends up in a fumble, literally like on the 1-inch line. And then Lamar threw that bad interception on that drive after that. But it wasn't like a situation where it's, the Ravens can't play from behind. Of course, they didn't finish those drives, which is a massive, massive part of it. But they still were able to get down there on those 2 huge times. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Like, do you think they've leaned a little bit too much on the passer? I was even before that though, Tage, I was kind of surprised that I would have loved to see a little bit more quick passing, I think, in this one, where I was really happy with what we saw the week previous with Monken kind of adapting, as particularly in the second half, where Kansas City did a good job in this one multiple times, blitzing, kind of like layer your blitzes a little bit. So it's not just everyone running upfield and Lamar can kind of pick his lane, but close those lanes just like a little bit of a different time to really, really make it hard for him there. So Tej, I don't know, any thoughts on the Ravens kind of really pass heavy game script on that one?
It was interesting because I think Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson have had such a good year because of what they've been able to do to add just so many layers to this pass game when the run game is almost always going to be good for Baltimore. But now that they were able to take their pass game to another level, like it is going to win Lamar an MVP. It was a big part in them getting the 1 seed in the AFC. But when you go up against the Chiefs defense that ranks 10th against the pass, but 25th against the rush, I would have liked to see more running from Baltimore. Everyone's going to mention that they gave 6 carries to running backs, but it's worth mentioning. I do think that they could have leaned into that more, and they could have led more. They only four rushes to running backs in the first half. So I thought that's something that they could have done. And like when you look at this game as a whole, you're dealing with some small sample sizes in the run game because of the limited opportunities, but they had a 90th percentile EPA per rush, but only a 12th percentile EPA per pass. And that was impacted by the plethora of negative plays that they had in this game.
Yeah, I think year 2 is going to be really important to see in the system what kind of small tweaks are made. And of course, it stinks that we have to make these kind of like conclusions based on really one game against what literally this team is going to be one of the 2 best teams in the league based on end result. So that is a little bit of a bummer, I think, for the Ravens overall. But think about it on the Chiefs side, the way that, Spag just uses his personnel in such a fun way where they have just a lot of different body types on defense that can fill a lot of different roles. Watching some of these safeties come downhill is so fun because they're more than happy to tackle. And immediately my mind goes to, well, what is that going to look like against San Francisco, where McCaffrey feels like he's like running a little bit extra angle? Like there are going to be some big collisions in that Super Bowl game. I thought, Spags obviously deserves like more credit than I think we talked about him, I think once or twice this year, but just a really, really good job throughout the game. I thought Kansas City, they were able to win in those tight window plays where, like I said earlier, like you're comfortable playing man coverage. What does that do for you? You can send pressure a lot more comfortably when you know that, you're comfortable on the back end from a pass game perspective. We still got to see some of those Lamar Jackson superhero plays. We get that. I think it was the second drive where he escapes and throws that touchdown to Zay Flowers. The self catch. That was incredible. Dude. I don't know. Like, is that something that you were doing in your flag football quarterback days, or were you more, let's just take that downfield pass?
Well, I mean, Lamar with, positive pass EPA and positive receiving EPA on the same play. You almost never see that happen. I guess Marcus Mariota did it to the Chiefs as well in the playoffs, years ago at this point. But yeah, flag football days, it rarely happened. I just think about the when Giselle, Tom Brady's wife, brought up like, oh, Tom can't throw and catch to himself as well. Whenever one of those plays happens, I always think it's funny to go back to her Facebook post about that.
Yeah, Lamar really showing he could absolutely do it all in that game. I thought Chris Jones and Karlaftis had a pretty good game on the defensive line. I think they lost Omenihu with a torn ACL, so he won't be playing in the Super Bowl against his former team in the 49ers. I do think, though, looking ahead, that the Kansas City defensive line should feel a little bit comfortable in some of these spots. I'm not sure if you share the same feeling. It feels like you get Chris Jones, you get Karlaftis, maybe both of them on the offense's right-hand side away from Trent Williams, and that's a situation where the Kansas City Chiefs might feel like they're in a little bit of a positive matchup there.
I do think with Omenihu being announced with a torn ACL today that the Chiefs are going to get pretty creative with how they line up some of their defensive linemen. And I'm totally with you. I think that, and we'll talk about it when we get to the 49ers Lions, but like the right side of the 49ers offense is one of like the only weaknesses that they have on offense. So I could see Chris Jones lining up there a ton. And we did see like peak Chris Jones in this game. It was a great effort by him. There was a drive where I think he affected basically every play. So like it was really cool to see him play at a very high level that we know that he can play at. And then like you mentioned, like the Chiefs tackling is such a high level right now. The Big Data Bowl was just on the topic of tackling itself. And there was so many good entries about tackles over expected and yards saved. And when there is a pulling offensive lineman on run plays, like how defenses treat that. And, after reading through a bunch of those this past week and then watching the Chiefs play, like I think they did so well in all of those different categories in this game.
Yeah. All right. Let's flip it to the other side, Tish, because we get on this podcast for however many weeks, whatever. It's like week 22 or something like that. Since we did some in the preseason. And unsurprisingly, it feels like at the end, we're here talking about Patrick Mahomes. I do want to talk about two kind of specific things about Patrick Mahomes. His just ability to avoid sacks is so incredible. I have to imagine his pressure to sack numbers are pretty low in it seems like a special way when you see it's pocket navigation. It's like the genius of understanding the physical space that's around you. It's, trust in receivers a lot of times where you see him kind of like floating a ball to Travis Kelce, where I'm sure that Chiefs fans maybe were a little bit tight when that ball was in the air, but your receiver comes down with it and you're more than happy to have it. So like pressure to sack, that's one. And then the specific way that Mahomes is accurate is really, really cool to me because it's not just, can you hit this receiver on the run, get them in stride, but like I think he understands really well, and other quarterbacks do, but like he can just anchor a receiver. So you're kind of like deadening him where the receiver's running and, there's maybe a defender that's in that zone in front of that receiver. Can you throw the ball in a spot that just sits the receiver down? We see that with Travis Kelce a lot, where I think the thing that probably makes them the most special together is that Kelce understands where to sit in zone coverage. And then Mahomes knows where that's probably going to happen and can make sure that those throws are in ways that are really, really good there. So they just a really special performance all season, I think, considering the circumstances. Obviously, the Chiefs get shut out for the second half. So we do have to, it's unfortunately the last game of this year that we get to see with Mike McDonald, our stats and scheme defensive coordinator of the year, of course, calling plays and really, really good performance. Tej, I don't know if you want to kind of kick us off a little bit there with the Ravens defense versus the Chiefs offense.
I know that's the thing, right? Is like Mike McDonald had a great game, especially after the first two drives, but like Mahomes is just inevitable where there's nothing really you can do to force him to make negative plays. The Chiefs only had an 8.6% negative play rate in this game. The majority of that was from running the ball. You compare that to the Ravens having a 16.1% negative play rate, so double. So the Chiefs did a great job of avoiding that. Up until this game, Mahomes hadn't taken a single sack in the playoffs so far. Like you mentioned, he has the second best pressure to sack rate in the league at 13%. So if there is a pressure that occurs on a play, he only gets sacked 13% of those, which is very, very good. He's only taken 2 sacks on 40 pressures this entire postseason, charted by FTN data, and he's had 0 interceptable passes the entire postseason. So just a really great job of minimizing mistakes by Mahomes. And again, it was another low average depth of target game and another game where the Chiefs offense shows that they can rely mostly on yards after catch. Patrick Mahomes had a 5.9 air yard per attempt in this game, which is 13th percentile. He only threw deep, past the 20-yard air yard mark 2 times in this game. And one of them was the shot to MVS to close out the game. The other one was forced incomplete by Kyle Hamilton. But when you look at Mahomes in this game, 6 passes over the middle of the field, 1.8 EPA per pass over the middle of the field. He was 5 for 6 when throwing over the middle of the field. When throwing to the left or right, he had negative EPA per pass on both of those, but it was just the ability to choose when to go over the middle of the field and to hit Kelce on that touchdown that traveled 19 air yards to the right. Like that was everything that made him really good in this game. And even though the Chiefs offense didn't do much in the second half, they didn't even cross the plus 40 until the very last play of the game when they threw it to MVS. Mahomes still had a 73rd percentile EPA per dropback on the road against a very, very good pass defense without, arguably his best offensive lineman. And he was throwing to secondary receivers like Noah Gray and Isaiah Pacheco and Justin Watson. He made it all work, which is such another impressive performance from him as he just keeps stringing these together in the playoffs.
I'm glad you mentioned the low air yards on really I think you could see it pretty early in the game where it felt like the Chiefs were trying to really control that tempo through quick screens and little RPO throws where you're going to play a defense who's going to play fantastic zone coverage. I think, it could be a smart way to attack it. I think that's something that Cincinnati did against San Francisco in a few different ways early in the season when Cincinnati beat them. So that'll be interesting to see how they decide to attack the 49ers. And Tej, I think that, pressure to sack is something that we're going to talk about. We have to talk about it in the offseason. I think when you look at Mahomes, then you look at, maybe when we get to talking about the next game, the difference between how Brock Purdy and Jared Goff, handled pressure and were able to perform under pressure. I think you agree with me. Pressure to sack at this point in the NFL, it's a like incredibly important metric. But then obviously, on the more kind of qualitative basis, are you able to make plays when you are pressured, because you are not going to be clean all the time? And then when you are pressured, is that a sack? Is that an interception? Or are you we talked about, obviously, Jordan Love, and I think CJ Stroud do such a great job of making that kind of weird, like off-platform throw at a high level. So Tej, anything else to say about pressure to sack? I think that might be the stat of the stats and scheme off season.
We will talk about it a lot when we start doing draft analysis on these quarterbacks. Pressure to sack rate has been proven to be very important when talking about quarterbacks college to pro, because when you look at pressure to sack rate, it stems from time to throw, and the sack rate also stems from time to throw. And time to throw is one of the most stable things when going from college to pro. It's one of the most stable things going from season to season. You can pretty accurately predict someone's time to throw from season end to season end plus one, and that directly feeds into your sack rate and your pressure to sack rate. So you can see how all of these things are connected together. So as we do offseason analysis on these quarterbacks, whether it's season to season or college to pro, it'll pop up a lot just because of that.
So you said that time to throw is relatively stable from college to pro. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting one that okay. All right. I'm excited to dig deeper into that. It feels like, hopefully, I wonder how much, is that a quarterback thing? Is it a little bit of a scheme thing? Obviously, at the college level, or it feels like when I'm watching the film of these guys, it's a lot more of those, quick RPO throws and, catch and get it out, as opposed to, some of the things that you have to do at the NFL level. Obviously, you're still making a lot of those types of plays in the NFL on Sundays like this one. Tej, I do want to make sure that we give our final cap tipping to Mike Macdonald, and particularly really Kyle Hamilton in this game. Such a star. You get that drive where I think it was like a PBU and then a TFL and then a pressure on the same drive. And I think that Mike Macdonald has a really, really good feel of when to send pressure and how to send pressure. You don't just see it automatically on the first drive, like it's all going to kind of, unleash all the cards right there. And like you mentioned, even in those drives where Kansas City was able to score, those are Mahomes superhero plays, like the conversion to Kelsey, where it's just so weird to watch a quarterback roll out to the right and kind of throw like a lofted ball back to the middle like that. Those aren't plays that you really are expecting more or that many people doing. Maybe that one you can, but a lot of just really, really over the top plays from Mahomes is what ends up winning them the day. I'm curious when again, we'll spend more time, certainly next week after we put out our Super Bowl preview on Monday, then we'll talk about it on our pod here on Tuesday. The 49ers, they want to live in zone coverage. And I think that, the way that Travis Kelce is able to deal in space and find voids in zone, I think that's something that they're going to be able to take advantage of. But also, I really wonder, I think that Kansas City went through a lot of gap scheme run where they're running power a lot, where they feel comfortable with their interior offensive linemen in a lot of ways. But San Francisco's defense, as we'll talk about them in a little bit, they have trouble on some edge runs. So that's going to be a kind of interesting one there. Tej, anything to clean up there between that part of the matchup before we head to your favorite game of the weekend?
Yeah, I think that this version of the Chiefs is just so much different than other versions that we've seen, especially like if you go all the way back to 2018, Mahomes' first year as a starter. It's been almost the opposite of like how they win these games, where the Chiefs were the 11th best team on scripted plays this season with only a 0.08 EPA per play. In this game, though, they came out drives 1 and 2, they had a 0.6 EPA per play. They were able to score and just hold on to the lead. The rest of the game, they had a negative 0.08 EPA per play after those two drives. So it's just like a different formula to winning that I think is really interesting, where they can have trust in their defense to get stops, and they even force turnovers for them when needed. And it's been really interesting to watch the evolution of this Chiefs team from trading Tyreek Hill, nailing so many of their draft picks after that Tyreek Hill trade, especially with McDuffie and Karlaftis and Pacheco all in the same draft. And then now all those pieces having a big impact on this game to send them to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, really it feels like a strong defense, but also a smartly opportunistic defense where you get that sack fumble where Lamar Jackson he's like literally about to step up and throw to an open receiver that's clearing into open space. I think it was a Menahu that ends up knocking the ball out. And then obviously the Snead one was so great. I don't know what, maybe another thing that I'm just adding to our offseason to look at list, but just like you have to be able to punch the ball out as a defense now. Like you can't just not be able to do that. I think we see it more like across the league. And I don't know whether it's that they're able to do it more in training camp because they can't tackle all the time, but being able to force almost in that particular way when people maybe aren't, as safe with the ball across the goal line is a big deal. But all right, Tish, it's time to get to the Lions 49ers game. We're going to start with the Lions offense versus the 49ers defense, which was after a half of football was absolutely incredible. I thought it was awesome. That opening script, you get into that outside kind of crack toss right away. You get into split zone where Green Bay was able to have a bunch of success against the 49ers on those two particular runs where, you try and get those linebackers stuck in mud a little bit. Pin and pull and crack toss is something that I'm sure that Andy Reid is watching and saying, well, this is something that we can do too, where I don't know, you see the way that the 49ers, they want to get upfield. If a receiver can, push them down and hold them just a little bit there, you're able to get the outside in so many different ways. Obviously, we see Jameson Williams just a full burner around the edge. And I'm definitely going to ask you to look up a bunch of stats on how I think the 49ers do on the edge in general. And the 49ers overall, they are a relatively static defense. And, I'm not sure, do we say, oh, just being static is bad? Is it good? I lean towards you want to be able to mix it up in different ways. But I thought that Ben Johnson had he had a really good day calling plays. I think that the unfortunate part of this weekend is you lose Mike McDonald and Ben Johnson. Their performances kind of go to the wayside, which they were so good. But obviously, Tish, wins win the day, unfortunately. So why'd you talk to us a little bit about the Lions offense versus the 49ers defense?
Look, I am going to be objective here. Being a sad fan is what Twitter is for, but I'll make sure that I can compliment both sides here and not let a fan bring it into it too much. But I mean, you mentioned that main point there where I thought Ben Johnson called a 42-point game, but the execution just wasn't there. You look at the Lions' first couple drives, touchdown. They punted on the third drive, touchdown, and then they kicked a field goal on 4th and 3 right before the half. And then in the second half, they come out and you have the Josh Reynolds drop to open up the first drive of the second half on 4th down. So they don't convert on there. The Jahmyr Gibbs fumble on the ensuing possession caused their drive to be stopped there. They have a Josh Reynolds drop again on 3rd down that could have extended the drive. And then the punt should have been down at the 1, but they ended up letting it go in for a touchback. And then they went for 4th down again on their 4th drive, and Jameson Williams, he had an opportunity to catch a flea flicker earlier, and then Goff just wasn't able to get to his side of the progression in time on that 4th down when they were running mesh, and it ended up not converting. So I thought all the play calls were there in the second half, just like they were in the first half. It was just a matter of fact of the execution of the actual plays, and that wasn't there for the Lions. But great game plan overall. Lions understood that the 49ers could be run on, and they leaned into that with a negative 4.4% pass rate over expected. The 49ers can especially be ran on the outside. And so when you look at the run gaps that the Lions were running in this game, they ran outside the tackles on 10 rushes for a 0.94 EPA per rush, which is one of the best marks of the entire season. They only ran their other 9 rushes inside, whether it was in between the tackle and guard or in between the guard and center. And those both had negative EPAs associated with them. When you look at the 49ers run defense as a whole, they have faced the most edge rushes of any of the 3 run gaps, and they have been beat on those to a decent amount, giving up a 0.14 EPA per rush when teams are running outside. So like you mentioned, I think that Andy Reid is going to be really excited to lean into those in this game against the 49ers when looking ahead to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, there's certainly like a little bit more nuance there in terms of, well, does the ball like get bounced outside? Obviously, there's like different areas of the offensive line you can run to, but I do think that is really informative. Tej, I do want to talk about, like that punt was crazy. That was such an awesome punt, right? Like for the ball, and then for the ball to bounce up like that, I don't know. If I was a gunner there's just no shot that I'm expecting the ball to bounce up at the 5. So unfortunately, that punt goes to the wayside, and just kind of continuing to talk about just awesome designs. You get that quick Amon-Ra St. Brown screen. I forgot. I think it was 3rd and 8 where the 49ers, like they're very clearly in a pressure look. They want to get into their pressure package. You just throw the ball out there and he's happy to pick up those yards. I thought a bunch of times throughout the day, Goff was happy to take some of those checkdowns where that yak I thought was piling up in a bunch of different ways. There's a 3rd and 12 where Goff like checks into weak side counter into a blitz, and it's just like Gibbs like a foot race to the edge, and then Sewell's pulling out and he's able to push a guy over late. That was really, really good one. There's that 3rd and I think it was 3rd and 18 where they do a really good job occupying zone defenders. I think that's something that particularly, against a defense like the Ravens, against a defense like the 49ers, where they're going to play zone coverage. Like that is their identity. They do it very well. They do it very well for good reasons, and they're going to continue to do that if you're able to, especially this is a good one where on a deeper to go situation, when you're able to get some of those deeper, like the safety is kind of buzzing down, but you get him to turn back with the route over his head because he's of course worried about that, to have St. Brown, I think it was St. Brown underneath that. That was a really good one. They had a play where they kind of ran like curl flat to both sides, and then Gibbs looks like he's running a choice route, just gives a quick shake and continues up vertical, which was awesome because, in empty, a lot of times there's going to be a linebacker that ends up on Gibbs, or if you're able to get those safeties out of there, it's just a tough spot to be in. Unfortunately, the Goff, I think he had to drift a bit to his left. That was a tough miss to have, but then he comes back and throws a strike. And a lot of this game, I felt really good about what Jared Goff was doing. You mentioned the 2 Reynolds drops, and even outside of that, before the 4th down Reynolds drop, this was a really, really fun play. I think it was 3rd and 4 at this point where the 49ers, they're in like a rush front. So their defensive line is spread out. Like the center and both guards are just totally uncovered. You get Amon-Ra St. Brown in the backfield. Gibbs is split out, and Gibbs being split out is a really good thing to have because you see, well, are you going to match it with the linebacker? That gives you more of a man coverage feel. And the 49ers did in that situation. So now the box is a little bit lighter. You're happy to run there where the 49ers are essentially missing a linebacker in the box. They have a cornerback or a defensive back type body there. And then you have Kinlaw and Warner just like erase the space there. So that was huge. Yeah, obviously we talked about the 2 drops, the Jameson flu flicker. That's a rough one. I think that I wonder, like, if you're a burner, is it something where, you feel the safety's there, that you're probably not going to win there. But as a quarterback, I think you're like, well, I'm going to keep taking these shots downfield. I think that's something you see across the league. That's just unfortunate that kind of happens. I'm glad you mentioned that 4th down mesh play. I thought that was really, really awesome on the 49ers side. That's probably, I think, from what I saw, just the best call that the 49ers had all game, where, just like I said before, when your running back is split out, if the defense is matching with the linebacker, that's usually a tell that you're going to get man coverage. If a cornerback is out there, probably going to be a zone, because why is the defense going to waste a cornerback on a running back? So they bump, I think it's Gibbs at that point, back in. We just have all the tells that the defense is going to be in man coverage. They check to like a play where Jameson Williams is pretty much running that underneath route, kind of getting through traffic. It's a great man beating concept to have. And the 49ers drop to cover 2, pass it off beautifully, get a little bit of pressure, and get that throwaway. And Tej, I think that's a good time to kind of move a little bit to, well, Goff against the pressure, I think kind of defined this day. Unfortunately, after what, like I'm happy to say, was a good performance for most of the day, and then obviously on the ground as well. So I don't know if you had any numbers or anything on that with how Jared Goff was doing against pressure.
I did think this was a great Jared Goff game overall, especially when passing over the middle of the field, something that is very hard to do against the 49ers. He was able to pass 12 times for 0.47 EPA per pass on those plays, which is very, very high level, especially to Sam Laporta, St. Brown on a couple of those key 3rd downs that you were talking about. And he finished with 7 total EPA on the day, which was really good. But, as Akash Anaverthan pointed out on Twitter, when Jared Goff was under pressure in this game, he was 3 for 13 for 26 yards and took 2 sacks with a 39.6 passer rating. So when kept clean, I thought Goff was phenomenal in this game. And it was really the under pressure stuff that, really got to him. I thought that one of his better plays of the game resulted in an incompletion where he was able to escape a pressure and throw to Josh Reynolds on that fourth down that ended up being a drop. So like there was just some bad variance with there for sure. But overall, really, really good game from Goff. And I think that when he goes up for an extension this offseason, that'll be a pretty big bargaining point from his agents for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And just, I don't think we have to go too far down the fourth down discourse. I'm sure, whoever wants to read whatever they want to read about it, that's fine. I thought Olsen did a really good job. I'm not sure if you agree. I think we can give Greg Olsen, New Jersey's very own, the Stats and Scheme Commentator of the Year award. Are you happy to join me in awarding him that?
I'm totally for that. I am worried he's going to get replaced next year. But I want him on our TV somehow as the number one crew, because I think he's been phenomenal the entire season.
Yeah, I think that he is particularly phenomenal because he embodies the name of this podcast. He does a really, really good job, not like simplifying, but really distilling. Well, this is what you need to know about this part of the scheme. This is what this stat means. I think that's really a hard thing to do, especially live. And yeah, shout out to him. Did a great job with that. And even looking at kind of Dan Campbell interviews, like, hey, did you regret the fourth down decisions? When he's talking about it, he wasn't saying like, oh, our model said X, Y, or Z. He was really citing his feeling. I think that that's kind of accurate with what he's done all year. He has a confidence in this team to be able to pick up those yards. So it's interesting to see, it's not just that he's looking at a model and saying, go or no go. It's what his internal feeling. So a lot of that is something that, if you just are hey, well, whatever the coach's gut says it is, some coaches, I guess, have more aggressive guts, if you can call it that. But Tej, one thing I wanted to, kind of ask you, some people, you do use your models, and I'm sure we both know a lot of teams that do use these models, at least in, talking to their coaches and stuff like that. If you don't want to do the math on a paper or in your head and be like, all right, well, this is how many possessions are still going on, and this is what our win probability is. I think it might be smart to ask a computer to be able to do that. So I want to ask you, there's, I guess, maybe three things that have come up with me in terms of conversations where other people have been talking to me that they're not sure, well, does the model account for this? So I'm going to ask you three things. I think three things. Maybe we could even just do a yes or no. So does a base model, would it account for relative team strength? So in this situation, we think of the 49ers offense. They're really rolling. The Lions are like a 7-point underdog in this situation. You probably consider the 49ers better. I think, I did certainly go into this game. So would an average model be able to account for relative team strength?
That's a great question. These models are centered around win probability and what would happen based on each of your decisions from a win probability standpoint if there's a success or failure. So success or failure if you go for it, success or failure if you kick the field goal and it's made or missed. So in a win probability model, the opening spread is a pretty heavy factor in determining, what the win probability will be throughout the game. And that prior stays true for most of the game, even if the underdog is winning, for example.
Okay. So your answer would be yes to relative team strength.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And then what about game context? So this example is, I think it's the second one in the Lions game where it's how many possessions are going to be left? Is something how many possessions are going to be left for this team? Are they going to have enough time to get it back? Would you consider that something that's kind of accounted for in the models in one way or another?
Yeah. So again, since it's based on being a win probability model, that would be taken into account is how many possessions left, just because that would be accounted for in your chance to win the game going forward.
Okay. And then the last one, it's all right, well, what would your likelihood of victory be? Does it calculate your win probability or victory probability if you kick a field goal versus if you go for it? You're saying that is the baseline, right?
Yeah. So, basically how it works is, how the models you'll see Ben Baldwin's model on Twitter and some of the other public models is you have to calculate a conversion rate for each of the events happening on a play. So what's your chance of converting based on down distance, the spread, the team strengths, all that stuff. And then what's your chance of making a field goal based on those same factors. And then if you get a little bit more advanced, you have a kicker specific effect in the model. And then conditional on this thing happening or not happening, what would your win probability be after the play is over? And you can just multiply all those probabilities together to get your decision to go for it. So when you look at these Lions decisions in particular, with the win probability models that we use and we have access to that deal with small sample sizes, especially at the end of games, you don't want to say for certain that if the win probability advantage is not greater than, let's say, plus or minus 1.5% of win probability added based on your decision, that you're fully confident in the decision. So anything between that is usually known as a toss-up, which is coach's discretion. You think about an obvious 4th and 1, you're down 7 in the fourth quarter. That's a go by almost everyone in the NFL. But if you're 4th and 3, down 3, like a situation like the Lions were in, that's more of a toss-up, even if the 4th down models lean go. So it does have to come down to either the head coach or whoever the game management guy is for the team to confirm that decision, because it's not a cut and dry decision by the models.
And then there's still like a little bit of a human element, or that, of course, these teams are going to have more information, or their model may just be like a step bumped up, updated from the ones that we use, right? In terms of maybe, I mean, Kevin O'Connell, I think, talked about it. I think it was 2 years ago, where it's like, like we went for it the first time, we got a penalty, and then the next time, like we just didn't have another play drawn up. So they obviously have a good idea for that. Or if on the field, I don't know, your quarterback like finger is hurt and no one else knows about it except for you. Or you see a linebacker on the other side who just started limping and you feel really confident. So I think we both acknowledge that there's still like a large human element. And then the team is able to have more information that they can kind of bake in to their decision-making process. I think you agree with that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm really glad that you touched on all those points, and that's like really where the toss-up element of this comes into that, is where you start factoring those factors into the equation. But I mean, when you just look overall, like 4th down go rates have gone up basically every season since like some of this information started to become publicly available. So the league is catching on to it. But it is hard to change people's opinions on the topic just because of, again, like the range of outcomes that can happen when you go for it on 4th down. I really think that no one is talking about the decision for the Lions to kick the field goal from 4th and 3 right before halftime, where they did go up 24-7. They made the field goal and they did make it a 3-possession game, but that was another toss-up decision where the Lions chose to be more conservative. And then at the end of the game, they chose to be more aggressive in those same toss-up decision scenarios. So it goes back and forth. Like, I think that the whatever happens at the end of the game because of recency bias is going to be focused on more.
Yeah, I just think I mean, Tej, I think that we've been able to have good conversations, even not into microphones, about this kind of stuff. I just think it's so important. There's so much good information out there. I think it's a disservice not to at least ingest it a little bit. I don't think neither of us are saying, hey, like this is so obvious, you have to agree with this one way or the other. I do think that both of us agree with the more aggressive side of those toss-up decisions, but there is so much good information out there. I think it's smart to be able to dig in kind of as much as you can. And I think that Dan Campbell should be properly praised throughout this whole entire year for, really having an aggressive ethos throughout the entire organization that was able to get them there. So to, hyper criticize him, obviously there are extreme situations. Like, I think that both of us agreed that, 4th and 8 against the Cowboys, after that, let's go ahead and kick that extra point, Dan, and we can go ahead and play overtime. But, obviously props to him and their offense in so many ways. All right, Tej, let's get over to the 49ers offense versus the Lions defense. And I do think we have to talk a lot about Brock Purdy in this game. And Brock Purdy, just like when he scrambles, is it's a ride. I think that that's really what differentiates him from some of the other quarterbacks that Kyle Shanahan has had in that spot. And I'm really interested, even thinking ahead. In this game, Purdy was able to make a bunch of plays, kind of breaking structure. He had the crazy one where he's like, unblocked blitzer, he just brushes him off his shoulders. He finds Juszczyk kind of toe tapping on the sidelines. There's the other one where I think it was just like a regular kind of keeper play where he ends up finding Juszczyk in the middle of the field later on. So that's going to be something when it comes time for Kansas City, where they're a team that I think they like to, well, I know they like to because I'm watching on the film, but like they're linebackers, you'll watch them and they will turn towards receivers and they're matching routes in that way. And that allows, some of that middle of the field to get vacated a little bit. If a quarterback is able to break the pocket, you saw Lamar able to do it a little bit. I'm not sure if the Chiefs are going to have a spy for Purdy in the same way that they did for Lamar. I would be pretty surprised. We'll get to see, Debo with a bunch of yards after catch in this game. I thought the Lions did a pretty good job playing really, really heavy in that box early on. But to me, you obviously kind of defined by that crazy bounce of a ball for Brandon Ayuk. Now, I will say, I think it's important that, the decision on that, I thought I was actually fine with the decision. That middle of the field safety kind of hammers down. I think that they want to give Purdy a green light to throw that ball in a catch. It was just so wild that it did end up in that catch. I thought that the Lions did look good at times, particularly, when they're able to get pressure. And then looking at that, that also brought to mind, well, all right, well, what's Kansas City defensive line going to do against San Francisco? So, Tej, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about specifics. San Francisco offense versus Detroit's defense.
I'm glad that you brought up the scrambling point from Brock Purdy, because that, like you mentioned, like that's just not an element that has been prevalent in the Kyle Shanahan offense. They tried to get there with Trey Lance. Obviously that experiment didn't work out, but Purdy is not, the type of runner that Trey Lance is. Or I even think that they mentioned Lamar Jackson on the broadcast yesterday, which was pretty funny, but he is able to at least scramble or move around in the pocket if the first and second read aren't there. And so he had 3 scrambles in this game that went for 5 points, 5.4 total EPA, which is his most on the season. You look at some of the other games, like against the Bengals, when he had 6 scrambles for 4.4 EPA, or week 1 against the Steelers when he had 2 scrambles, and like that, the ability to just have that in his back pocket as like a break glass in case of emergency scenario is really important for him. And, if he's not scrambling, you're still going to get big games out of just the 5 different weapons that they have to be able to get there. And I even think that Jawan Jennings is an underrated player of the catches that he's able to make in some pretty tough situations sometimes. But just starting from the top, like Deebo Samuel, 30% target share, 66% success rate when targeted yesterday. Brandon Ayuk had a 27% target share, 34% success rate when targeted. George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk even had a big catch down the field. Like, I think all of those things together just makes this 49ers offense an offense that can just score so quickly. And that's what we saw in the second half when they scored 27 unanswered.
Yeah, I thought that there was also that interception, of course, that Purdy threw. I think that it was like pressure off the right side that I keep mentioning, and then Purdy kind of high fives the defensive lineman there. So you're probably gonna have another one that ends up like that in some way, whether it's pressure or not pressure from Kansas City. I thought there was one that was later where I think it seemed like it hit the Lions cornerback's hands on the goal line. It wasn't like a great view on it from the end zone cam on that one. But Tish, did you have numbers for Purdy when he was doing all of his fun stuff scrambling around?
So I don't think that got charted yet in the data, but a question I wanted to ask you was, Lions were sending 5 a lot in the first half, and they kind of went away from that in the second half. Was there anything that you noticed as a reason for why they did that?
I'm not sure. Like when because I do remember seeing like a few people talking about that in a few different ways. I mean, maybe they were comfortable just getting 4. I think that there was a few times where they like didn't want to just lock man with Ayuk on the outside. So obviously, I mean, when you rush 5, you're almost certainly going to be playing man coverage. On that interception, particularly, they're clouding Ayuk's side. I think it's the backside of a 3-by-1. So like they're in more of a zone mentality there. So it may have been that they were a little bit less comfortable in the pass game, or like the way that they fit the run, they didn't like it out of just sending 5. I think that'd be one I'd have to look a little bit further into. But either way, as a Lions fan, which I am not, but you get Aaron Glenn coming back, and that'll be interesting to see. Does the roster look a little bit different? But then, as we keep thinking forward to the Super Bowl, I think that the question of, well, do you rush 5 against San Francisco? I think Kansas City may have a different answer for that, because their cornerbacks are really, really, really good. So I don't know if you have any other kind of thoughts going in there before we talk. We'll do like a quick talk, I think, going into the Super Bowl.
Yeah, so if we're going to be talking about it, just quickly, I think like what is really interesting about the 49ers this year is like they've been able to pass both win blitz and win not blitz at a very, very high level. On the other side of things, I think that Mahomes is like, he tears apart the blitz. I think everyone knows that. So like, he just doesn't get blitz. He gets blitz at the lowest rate in the league. So I think you might see 2 different styles here, where the the Spags might be sending a lot of extra rushers on his side of things, and then Mahomes will very rarely be seeing extra rushers when he has the ball on offense.
Yeah, it definitely a fun kind of style, makes fights kind of game. I really wonder, like, what do both quarterbacks look like in this game when they are pressured? I think that's going to be now we're just talking about going head to the Super Bowl, and I think that I'm excited for like seeing how much personnel diversity defensively that Kansas City really had against Baltimore excites me, because you have to be able to deal with like 21 personnel run game for San Francisco in so many different ways. And like I mean, really started this by saying, well, when you're confident in your cornerbacks play man coverage, it unlocks a lot of things for the defense. The way that the safeties were coming downhill against Baltimore, I think you're going to see that against San Francisco in many ways. So it does feel like, I know this is like the first 9.99 on a watchability score rankings at SumerSports.com. I agree with it. Like, I can't wait for so much of this. I feel like this is going to be a fun one to kind of text back and forth about as we kind of write our preview up for this one.
Yeah, if you thanks for bringing that up. Actually, if you go to SumerSports.com